Hi, hello. Welcome to episode 4 of the English Journeys podcast, as we set off on the next leg of our Borderland journey, leaving tales of Anglo-Saxon treachery behind us to encounter witches, dancing and ancient highways as we make our way to the town of Leominster. So, leaving Marden, we follow the lane as it winds over the floodplain of the River Lug, past straggling hamlets, pools and watercourses, until we reach the village of Bodenham, tucked in against the southern flank of Dinmore Hill, embraced by the River Lug as it follows the contours to meander around the village. And the village is quiet, it's almost isolated by hill and water, by river and lakes, but it hasn't always been quiet. It's a village which seems to attract more than its fair share of stories of ghosts, witches, of drinking and ribaldry. It's an active contributor to the county's rich folk life. And these stories survive more than anything else due to the determination of Mrs. Ella Leather, who scoured the county for material for her famous Folklore of Herefordshire, published back in 1912. She's one of the most important figures in the preservation of our popular history. She was one of the first great recorders of the tales, of the lives and music of country people. And she was a local woman, the daughter of a farmer, brought up in a rural life of stories and superstitions, her ear tuned to the locality, and she spoke to everyone she could find, anyone who had a story to tell or a song to sing, inviting their confidence and trust. In 1907, she heard the tale of a dreadful haunting of a farm in Bodenham. Animals became maddened, they'd run amok, crashing through gates and hedges, or would sicken and die in the space of a single day without warning, without apparent reason. The horses kicked over their traces, refused to return to their stables, and the farmer was in despair. Bad luck and physical catastrophe never seemed far away, and to the people of Bodenham at the turn of the 20th century, this was a clear case of witchcraft. So the farmer called on the services of a Mr. Jenkins, who lived out near Webley. He was a wise man, or clever man, as such men were called, and he had a reputation as a witch fetcher who could summon and defeat all manner of witches and spirits to restore peace to the troubled places and frightened people of Herefordshire. Mrs. Leather knew him well, and it was she who named him Jenkins, an alias she invented for him to conceal his identity and to allow him and his family some anonymity and privacy should she publish any tales featuring his skills, which of course she did. So when Jenkins arrived at the farm, he assured the farmer that all would be well. "You get into bed, my lad, I'll quieten those horses for you." But in the middle of the night, the farmer and his wife were woken by terrifying noises, and in the yard screams rent the darkness. In their house, plates and furniture were flying around the kitchen, and the farmer dashed out into the yard, but became dumbstruck, all moithered-like, as he put it. His own farmyard was strange and unrecognisable, and he was unable to find his way back to the house, until Jenkins appeared at his side and guided him home. He settled the farmer, the animals, and the house into a gentle peacefulness, and there were no more witches at that farm. But Jenkins remained a busy man. Herefordshire and witchcraft were inseparable companions. But Bodenham also had a reputation for song and dance, particularly Morris dancing, for which Herefordshire had been especially famous, although by Ella Leather's time in the early 20th century it had almost died out as a traditional art form. It's been revived again now, like many of our old folk traditions, well-dressing, wassailing, and a new awareness of the cycles of the year, of the seasons and of life. But they're in a softened form because, like so many of our traditions, there was an edge, a hard truth, underlying their original performance. They were expressions of real need for good harvest, for health, to appease those forces that could destroy as easily as bless us. And if you got it wrong, Well, that was a serious matter, in some ways as serious as life or death. And complex dances here, performed to fiddle and sometimes with Worcestershire bagpipes and drums, they were often danced in times of hardship, especially in times of hard frost, in the depths of winter when many of the farmhands were laid off because the land was unworkable. And so they danced for their supper, for food and money for their families to avoid starvation. So there must have been a certain fierceness in the antics of Maid Marian, the Fool and the Hobby Horse as they careered around the dancers. There could be up to a dozen of them for a whole set dance, all kept in order by two whifflers, the marshals who kept dancers and audience in their places. But there is still something inexplicably joyful about the Morris. It's more than just seeing a dance well performed. It's steps, rhythms, bells, sticks, movements. They're just full of delight. And Morris dancing has deep roots in Bodenham. Back in the early 17th century, in 1609, a Bodenham man, William Edwards, joined what must be one of the most bizarre dance groups ever formed. What was unusual, what is astonishing, was the age of the dancers. Edwards himself was 108 years old, and all the dancers were over 100. And they were gathered from all over the county. The oldest was the only woman in the troupe, Meg Goodwin of Urdisland, who claimed to be 120. And they all came together in Bodenham before travelling down to Hereford Racecourse, where they performed to huge popular acclaim, dancing in startling costumes of red and white, all decked out with ribbons and rosettes. William Edwards was the hobby horse, while Meg Goodwin danced as Maid Marian to the Robin Hood of John Mando of Cradley. It was a mere stripling of only 100. And it was said that their white-haired heads, nodding as they danced, looked like snowfall on the Malvern Hills. So, with dancing in our hearts, we travel up through Bodenham Moor to turn left onto the main road beside the handsome inn named England's Gate. In ancient times, this was a turbulent region. It's always been a kind of no-man's land, a wild border country, subject to raids, disputes, quarrels. And 2,000 years ago, it lay between the territories of 4 great Celtic tribes, and it sits at the very northwestern edge of the territory of the Dobunni tribe. And there was constant tension between them, the Ordovices to the west, the Cornovii to the north, and the Silures to the south. So it was a meeting point of 4 great tribal societies, and fighting, warfare, was endemic within Celtic society. Boys and girls from the age of puberty were trained in the arts of war. And this country, peaceful now, you feel would have seen an almost constant clash of arms as war bands circled, raiding, striking any area which seemed weak or isolated, as each tribal group sought to intimidate its rivals. And as we run along the valley of the Lug, there is a constant reminder of that troubled history of the marches. We have left Sutton Walls behind us to the south, but a couple of miles to the north is Risbury Camp, and facing us on the further side of the river is Ivington Camp, prominent on its great ridge. And they're both great prehistoric hill forts. In fact, this whole area, this western borderland of England, is scattered with hill forts and enclosures more than any other region in the UK. And there was clearly this need for defence, for imposing your presence and identity on the landscape and on your neighbours. Just a mile beyond Bodenham on the left is the castellated entrance to Hampton Court Castle, which can be glimpsed through the archway across the parkland. And the castle is, it's outrageously picturesque. It's a vision of towers and crenellations, great oaken gates, all set in a noble park and water meadows on a bend of the River Lug. But it's far too picturesque to be real. At its heart is the fortified manor built by Sir Rowland Benthell in the 15th century, when memories of Welsh incursions, of raids and attacks, were still relatively fresh in the mind. But today it is essentially the creation of the 19th century, of 19th century owners who extended and smartened and turned the building into a romantic vision. They wanted all the picturesque intrigue of the Middle Ages, but with all the modern comforts of drawing rooms, conservatory, library and kitchens. And we follow the road round over the River Lug at Hampton Bridge to turn right at the junction with the A49 towards Leominster. And this is one of the great trunk roads of England, one of the most varied and, in spite of its busy traffic, one of the most romantic. It runs the whole length of the Welsh Marches from Ross-on-Wye in the south to Bamber Bridge in the heart of industrial South Lancashire in the north. And we only touch on it for a couple of miles, and it's the only major road we encounter on our journey, but even such a brief acquaintance is exciting. And forget the petrol station opposite, the Cadbury's chocolate factory, the hard tarmac surface, and imagine a line drawn through the landscape. We're on a route which formed part of the Antonine itinerary, the Iter Britannorum, the essential roadmap of ancient Rome in Britain, running from Isca Augusta, which is modern-day Caerleon in South Wales, to Chester, the Roman city of Diva, and the home to the mysterious 9th Legion Hispania, which, according to tradition, marched into the mists of Scotland, never to be seen again. Over 5,000 men, legionaries and cavalry, vanished from history. And we travelled in their very footsteps up through Stretton Grandison as the Legion marched north to the conquest of Britain. And the road links the ancient cities of Hereford, Shrewsbury and Chester, passing through dramatic landscapes, skirting the edge of the Brecon Beacons and cutting through the Shropshire Hills, the Wenlock Edge, Caer Caradoc and the wild beauty of the Long Mynd. And it visits the ancient market towns of Leominster, Ludlow and Whitchurch, and the road kisses and crosses the great rivers of the Wye and Severn as they run east and south from the Welsh hills, and the Dee and the Mersey as they run west to meet the Irish Sea. It passes legendary battlefields of King Arthur and the Saxons, of the Prince of Wales, Owain Glendower and the English Mortimers, and the dreadful battlefield of Shrewsbury, which saw the routing and slaughter of the army of Harry Hotspur when he challenged King Henry IV. I mean, we could be journeying through a Shakespeare history play. So, to set foot on the A49 is to touch the very history of Britain. It is easy to get swept away. But keeping our balance, we skirt Leominster on the east and then turn to approach the town from the north to reach elegant Broad Street and the town centre. Even though Leominster is only a small town of around 14,000 people, it's still the largest town in Herefordshire. I mean, Hereford is a city. I mean, it's much bigger, but that doesn't count. And Leominster has a definite kind of urban air. It's got a bit of Victorian and Georgian swagger. And like Ledbury, it's the commercial centre for a large rural area. I mean, this is the place to come to for entertainment, for shopping, to socialise, for fun. At the northern end of town is the great Priory Church in sedate isolation. But in the centre, you get a very clear idea that this is a busy ancient town. The streets were laid out nearly 1,000 years ago. The little lanes, timbered houses, cramped shop fronts suddenly open up into broad marketplaces. Like Broad Street and Corn Square are lovely. They give a sense of, well, almost a sense of grandeur, really. Broad Street is, as its name suggests, wide and sedate. It's lined with a sophisticated mix of facades of brick and stucco of colour wash, interspersed with black and white half-timbering. Corn Square, the other remaining medieval market space in the town, is ridiculously picturesque. And if you stand in the middle of the square looking down towards the Merchant's House Cafe, you get a whole review of English vernacular urban building of the last 700 years. On your right, the group of half-timbered buildings flanking School Lane are seriously ancient. Their purpose is extraordinarily unchanged. They were built as a group of shops 600 years ago, and they're still a group of shops. Next to the cafe are neat little 17th century houses, all dwarfed by the grand and slightly pompous Victorian classicism of Lloyd's Bank. Well, as Lloyd's Bank at the moment is due to close next month. And just like today, it is trade that has been Leominster's raison d'etre. Back in the Middle Ages, the town was essentially owned and controlled by the powerful monastic authority of the Great Priory. And it was the priory that set the boundaries of the commercial streets, still followed by the modern street plan today, still influencing the way the town looks. And it was, of course, the priory that took the money from the rents of the shopkeepers, traders, and householders. And the town was rich. It was the original home of the ancient breed of Rydale sheep, animals which produced the finest wool in England, so highly regarded that it was known as Leominster ore, Leominster gold. From fields of flax it produced linen, fields of grain for brewing, all exports which brought wealth to Leominster merchants, and an emphasis on quality too. If something was especially good, it was known as good as Leominster bread. And there is still an emphasis on quality now. The town is still closely bound to its local farmers, its local producers of fruit, meat, cheese, and picking your way around the shops and delis of Leominster can be quite a gourmet treat. And the town centre is still full of a wonderful array of historic shop buildings, shop fronts, crammed into narrow lanes, carved and painted overhangs above you. I don't think I've ever been in a town with such a sense of living history. You are a Victorian shopper. You've wandered into a town which almost feels like the set of a costume drama. But it's not. This is no set. This is the real thing. But this quiet and profitable mercantile life was shattered in the 15th century. Battles raged around Herefordshire and the border between the Welsh nationalist forces of Owen Glendower, the true Prince of Wales, as he called himself, and the English armies of the King and the Lords of the Marches. In the first years of the century, Glendower was on the offensive. He was harrying the English forces and waging fierce guerrilla warfare. But in 1402 he fought and won a great battle at the hill of Brynglas near Pilleth, just over the Welsh border in Powys. And there he destroyed an army of Herefordshire men and captured their commander, Sir Edmund Mortimer, one of the great lords of the English marches. So the Welsh army pushed deep into Herefordshire, and resting in their stronghold of Ivington Camp high on the ridge, looking out over the Lug Valley, they could look down on Leominster and see a plump and tasty target. Easy fruit, just waiting to be plucked. There were no defences. The town didn't even have a wall, let alone anyone to defend it. With the Welsh on the march, most people had already packed up and left. So the Welsh armies came down from the hills. They took control of the town, burnt and looted, and locked Edmund Mortimer up in the Forbury prison, a dungeon contained within the gatehouse of the priory. Nearly 60 years later, the Forbury acquired a more sinister reputation. During the Wars of the Roses, the Civil War fought out in horrific battles between political factions as they vied for control of the throne of England. 3 great Welsh leaders, Owen Tudor, David Floyd, and Morgan ap Rwyther, were imprisoned by King Edward IV after their defeat at the nearby Battle of Mortimer's Cross. They and their followers were marched out and executed without trial at the crossroads in the town centre known as Iron Cross. And Iron Cross was the scene of many horrible punishments, none more cruel than the public torture and execution of the Catholic missionary Roger Cadwallader. He was a local Herefordshire man. He was born just outside Hereford in Sutton Sugwas, a devoted Catholic who refused to recant his religion and travelled throughout the county, celebrating Mass for the few families brave enough to remain in the Roman Church. Queen Elizabeth had declared Catholic priests traitors and the providing of Mass treason. And Roger was caught in 1610, in spite of all the help he received from his Catholic friends, and he was accused of treason and condemned to death. Dressed in chains, he was forced to walk from Hereford to Leominster, where he was imprisoned in Forbury, and then publicly hung, beheaded, and quartered at Iron Cross. His head was displayed on the market house and his 4 body parts displayed at the 4 main entrances to the town. He was beatified in 1986 by Pope John Paul, one of many English martyrs. And today you can still stand at Iron Cross, at the meeting of West Street, South Street and High Street. And the cross itself was long gone, if there ever was an actual cross. But past bloodshed and grim history are still palpable in this spot. But these disruptions were relatively short-lived. The serious business of shopping, drinking and making money soon reasserted themselves. In an almost distinct and separate part of town, set in its own park, is the Priory Church of St. Peter and St. Paul, the spiritual focal point of the town since its foundation. And you can easily walk through to it, through the archway in Corn Square, all round Church Street, past the site of Forbury Prison, to arrive at the Great West Door. But before we go in to explore, we'll sit down and have a well-earned rest. And we'll see you again in our next episode. The English Journeys podcast is directed, produced and engineered by Mike Ellis. It's written and spoken by me, Martin Ellis. And we would love to have your company as we continue our journey in the next episode.